You know what it's like to hear machetes being sharpened outside your window at 3 in the morning? I do. And I'm about to tell you something I've kept locked inside for 30 years. Something that still wakes me up screaming some nights. Something that turned me from a 17-year-old kid who loved football and dreamed of becoming an engineer into someone who understands what humans are truly capable of when hatred takes over. My name doesn't matter as much as my story does. But you can call me June, and this is how I survived 100 days of hell on Earth. April 6th, 1994. That's the date everything changed. That's when the plane carrying President Habyarimana was shot down. That's when my country lost its mind. But let me back up a bit, because you need to understand what Rwanda was like before. You need to understand how a country can go from your neighbor being your friend to your neighbor trying to kill you in less than 24 hours. Rwanda, in early 1994, wasn't perfect. Far from it. But it was home. I lived in Kigali, the capital. Our house was small, tucked into a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. My mother sold vegetables in the market. My father worked as a teacher. I had 2 younger sisters who drove me crazy the way little sisters do everywhere in the world. We were Tutsi. That's an ethnic classification that would soon become a death sentence. Now here's the thing most people don't understand about Rwanda. The Hutu and Tutsi weren't some ancient enemies who'd been fighting for centuries. We spoke the same language. We shared the same culture. We intermarried. We lived side by side. The hatred, that was manufactured, cultivated, weaponized. Belgian colonizers had given us identity cards in the 1930s, dividing us by ethnicity. They'd measured our noses and our heights, deciding who was Tutsi and who was Hutu based on arbitrary physical features, and who owned how many cows. They'd put Tutsis in positions of power, creating resentment. When Rwanda gained independence in 1962, that resentment exploded. Hutus took power, and suddenly, being Tutsi meant being the enemy. But in my childhood, in my neighborhood, we still lived together. My best friend Paul? Hutu. The guy who ran the corner store where I'd buy Fanta? Hutu. My teacher, Mr. Gasana, who encouraged my dreams of university? Hutu. I'm telling you this because it's important. What happened wasn't inevitable. It was a choice. A choice made by leaders who spread propaganda. A choice made by radio stations that called us cockroaches and snakes. A choice made by ordinary people who decided to believe the lies. In the months before April, the radio station RTLM got louder and louder. More vicious. They'd play music, tell jokes, then seamlessly slide into calling for the final solution to the Tutsi problem. My father would turn it off whenever it came on. Don't listen to that poison, he'd say. But poison spreads, and soon it was everywhere. April 6th, 1994, around 8:30 p.m. I was doing homework when we heard the explosion. Not close, but loud enough to rattle our windows. Then came the sounds of gunfire. Distant at first, then closer. My father rushed to turn on the radio. The announcer's voice was tense, almost excited. The president's plane has been shot down. Both presidents are dead. Rwanda's president and Burundi's president had been on that plane. Both dead. And then came the words that made my blood run cold. This was the work of Tutsi rebels. The cockroaches have struck. Every Hutu must do their duty. My mother grabbed my sisters. My father locked the doors. We turned off all the lights and huddled together in the back bedroom. "It will be okay," my father whispered. "The UN is here. The peacekeepers will protect us. It will be okay." He was wrong. That night we heard screaming. We heard gunshots. We heard our neighbor, Mr. Bizimana, shouting orders to other men in the street. Mr. Bizimana, who used to give me mangoes from his tree. Mr. Bizimana, who'd known me since I was 5 years old. Now he was organizing a killing squad. We didn't sleep. How could we? We sat in the dark, listening to our city tear itself apart. By morning, the roadblocks had gone up. Let me explain what the roadblocks meant. Because this is how they did it. This is how they tried to kill almost 1 million people in just 100 days. They set up checkpoints on every road, every major intersection. Militias called Interahamwe, meaning those who attacked together, manned these roadblocks with machetes, clubs studded with nails, and whatever guns they could get. Everyone who passed had to show their ID card. That card I mentioned from colonial times? Yeah, still in use. Still marking you as Tutsi or Hutu. Tutsi? You didn't pass. You died right there. Sometimes quickly. Usually not. The efficiency of it was terrifying. They'd set up these killing stations and just wait for people to come to them, like a spider's web. On April 7th, the day after the plane crash, my father made a decision. He was going to try to get us to the UN compound. There was a Belgian peacekeeping base about 5 kilometers away. If we could get there, we'd be safe. We waited until afternoon. My father thought the middle of the day might be safer than night, might draw less attention. He was trying to think strategically. But there was no strategy that worked against what was happening. We made it 3 blocks before we hit the first roadblock. I can still see it in perfect detail. Logs across the road. Maybe 15 men with machetes. A couple with guns. And off to the side, a pile of bodies. Fresh bodies. People killed that morning. One of the men stepped forward as we approached. I recognized him. He'd been in my father's class. A former student. "Teacher," he said, his voice almost apologetic. "You know I have to check." My father handed over our ID cards with a steady hand. I don't know how he stayed so calm. I was 17 and shaking so hard I thought I'd collapse. The man looked at the cards, looked at my father, looked at my mother and my sisters and me. "Teacher," he said again, "you taught me mathematics. You helped me graduate." There was a long, terrible pause. "Go," he finally said, handing back the cards. "Go now, and don't come back this way. Next time I won't be able to help you." We walked past him, past the other men with machetes who were watching, confused, past the bodies. My father didn't look back. He just kept walking, holding my mother's hand, my sisters between them. I followed, trying not to run, trying not to look at the dead people on the ground. We made it maybe another 2 blocks before we hit the second roadblock. This time, there was no former student. This time, the man who checked our cards smiled when he saw what they said. "Cockroaches," he announced to the others. "We have cockroaches." What happened next happened so fast I still can't put it all in order. The man grabbed my father. Other men rushed forward. My mother screamed, my sisters screamed, and my father looked at me and shouted one word, "Run!" I don't know why I obeyed. Every instinct told me to stay, to fight, to help. But I ran. I ran while my mother's screams echoed behind me. I ran while my father shouted for me to keep going. I ran while my little sisters cried out. I ran like a coward. That's what I told myself for years afterward, that I was a coward who abandoned his family. But a priest I met later told me something that helped. He said, "Your father's last act was to save you. Don't dishonor that sacrifice by hating yourself for surviving." I ran through alleys, through people's yards. I jumped fences. I hid behind trash piles. I heard men chasing me, but I didn't look back. I ended up in a partially collapsed building, some kind of old warehouse. I crawled into a gap between fallen concrete slabs, and I stayed there as it got dark. That's when I heard the sounds I'll never forget. The sounds of a city being murdered. Screaming, gunshots, grenades, and underneath it all, a sound like chopping wood. Except it wasn't wood. I stayed in that collapsed building for 3 days. 3 days without food. 3 days drinking water that leaked through the concrete, probably contaminated, but I didn't care. 3 days listening to the genocide happening all around me. On the 4th day, I heard voices in the building, Interahamwe, searching for people hiding. I held my breath as footsteps passed within meters of where I was hiding. I heard them joking about how many they'd killed, arguing about whether to rape women before or after killing them. These weren't monsters. They were ordinary men. That's what haunts me most, how ordinary they sounded. When they left, I knew I couldn't stay. They'd be back. They were searching systematically, building by building. So I made a plan, a desperate, probably stupid plan. But when you're 17 and alone and your whole family is probably dead, desperate seems reasonable. I was going to find a Hutu family and convince them to hide me. I know what you're thinking. That sounds insane. And yeah, it kind of was. But here's the thing. Not every Hutu participated in the genocide. Not every Hutu wanted to kill. Some were coerced, some were scared, and some, a brave few, actively chose to help. Those people are why I'm alive today. I waited until dark on the fourth night. I cleaned myself up as best I could with dirty water and tried to look less like someone who'd been hiding in rubble for days. Then I started walking through neighborhoods, looking for, I don't even know what. A sign, a friendly face, divine intervention. I saw hell along the way, bodies in the streets, houses burning, groups of militiamen drunk on banana beer and blood, celebrating their kills. At one point, I walked right past a roadblock, just brazenly walked past it in the dark, and nobody stopped me because I looked confident, like I belonged, like I was one of them. That's a lesson I learned that night. In chaos, confidence can be camouflage. I ended up in a neighborhood I didn't know, far from my own. I was looking at houses, trying to figure out which one might harbor someone with compassion, when I heard a hiss from a doorway. "Boy, here, quickly." I turned and saw a woman, maybe my mother's age, gesturing frantically from her front door. Every survival instinct I had screamed that it was a trap, but I was exhausted, hungry, desperate. I went to her. She pulled me inside and immediately pushed me into a back room. Her husband was there, a tall man with worry carved into his face. "Are you Tutsi?" the woman asked. I nodded. "Your family?" "Dead," I said. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. Probably dead. The man and woman looked at each other. Some silent conversation happened between them. "We have 2 children hiding already," the man said. "In the ceiling, there's room for 1 more. "Why are you helping?" I asked. It seemed important to know. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Because someone has to. Because this is wrong. Because I taught Tutsi and Hutu children together for 20 years, and they were all just children." She was a teacher, like my father. They gave me a small piece of bread and some water. Then they showed me how to access the hiding space above the ceiling in their storage room. I climbed up into darkness and found 2 other people there, a girl about my age and a boy, maybe 12. "I'm Jean," the girl whispered. "I'm Claude," the boy said. "Jean," I told them. And just like that, we became a family of sorts. 3 strangers hiding above the ceiling while genocide raged below. Let me tell you about living in a ceiling for 3 months. It's hot, unbearably hot. The metal roof absorbs sun all day and you're basically in an oven. It's cramped. The space was maybe 2 meters by 3 meters and only about 1 meter high. We couldn't stand. Could barely sit up properly. It's terrifying. Every sound outside could be someone coming to kill you. Every voice could be someone discovering your hiding place. But we survived. The family below, their names were Bernard and Immaculée. They risked their lives for us every single day. They brought us food when they could. Water, a bucket for our waste that Bernard would empty at night. They told us what was happening outside, and what was happening was horror. The genocide had spread everywhere. The UN peacekeepers, they'd mostly pulled out after 10 Belgian soldiers were murdered. Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian general who led the UN mission, stayed with a skeleton crew, but he wasn't authorized to intervene. The churches that had become refugee centers, massacred. Then Tarama Church, the Nyamata Church, thousands killed in places they thought would offer sanctuary. The radio kept broadcasting instructions, where Tutsis were hiding, how to find them, how to kill them. They called it work. Going to do work meant going to kill. And people went to work every day. Teachers, doctors, priests, neighbors, family members. Jeanne, the girl hiding with us, had seen her own uncle kill her parents. Her uncle, not some stranger. Family. How do you process that? How does a mind wrap itself around that level of betrayal? We'd whisper to each other at night when it was safer. Sharing stories, sharing memories, trying to hold on to who we were before. Claude, the 12-year-old, would describe his mother's cooking in detail. The exact way she made isombe, mixing cassava leaves with peanut butter. He'd describe it so perfectly you could almost taste it. Jeanne would talk about school, about wanting to be a doctor, about this boy she'd liked who'd been too shy to talk to her. I talked about football, about my dreams of engineering, about my father's terrible jokes that made everyone groan. We held on to these human things, these normal things, because if we didn't, if we only thought about the machetes and the screaming and the blood, we'd go insane. But the sounds still came through. Every day, every night, the sounds of people being killed, of houses being looted, of women screaming, of children crying, and we had to stay silent, perfectly silent. One time, Claude sneezed, just a small sneeze. But Immaculée came rushing up later and told us militia members had been 2 houses down, if they'd been closer, if they'd heard. We learned to breathe quietly, to move in slow motion, to communicate with hand gestures in the dark. We learned what it meant to be prey. There were so many close calls, so many moments when death came within centimeters. Once, Interahamwe came to Bernard and Immaculée's house, searching for people in hiding. We could hear them below, overturning furniture, shouting demands. "Everyone is hiding cockroaches," one of them yelled. "If we find any here, you'll die with them." We held our breath. Jeanne grabbed my hand. Claude's eyes were huge in the darkness. We heard them in the room below us. Heard them stabbing mattresses with machetes. Heard them kicking walls. Then one of them said, "Check the ceiling." My heart stopped. Footsteps. The scrape of something being dragged. They were getting a ladder or a stool. Then Bernard's voice. "Wait. I have something for you. Beer. Good beer. Hidden. Let me show you." A pause. Then laughter. "Beer. Why didn't you say so, friend?" They followed him out. We heard them in another room, drinking, laughing. Eventually they left. Bernard had bribed them with alcohol, had saved our lives with beer. Another time, Immaculée was bringing us food when neighbors came to the door. She had to hide the plates in her dress, pressing them against her body, while she talked to these neighbors about the work and nodded along as they described killing people we might have known. She told us later she smiled while they talked. Smiled and agreed while inside she was dying. "I don't know who I am anymore," she cried. "I smile at murderers. I lie to everyone. I've become someone else." Bernard held her. "You've become a hero," he said. "Never doubt that." But the stress was destroying them. We could hear arguments at night, the weight of hiding us, of lying constantly, of risking their own lives and their children's lives. It was crushing them. I felt so guilty. We all did. We were putting them in danger just by existing. But what choice did we have? Leave? Go outside. That was just a different kind of death sentence. So we stayed, and the days blurred together. 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months. We lost track of time up there. Day and night became meaningless. There was only hot and slightly less hot, light through the cracks and darkness. We got weak. The small amounts of food weren't enough. I could feel my body consuming itself. My ribs stood out. My arms became sticks. Claude got sick, fever, some kind of infection. He was delirious, crying out. We had to cover his mouth to keep him quiet. Immaculée managed to get some medicine from somewhere. How, I'll never know. But Claude survived. Jeanne developed sores from lying on the hard surface. They got infected. We had no way to clean them properly. She just had to endure, and I had nightmares. Even in that hell, I'd fall asleep sometimes from exhaustion, and I'd dream of my family, my father, my mother, my sisters. I'd dream they were calling for me, asking why I left them, why I didn't help. I'd wake up with Jean's hand over my mouth because I'd been crying out in my sleep. "They're gone," she'd whisper, "and you're alive." That's what they wanted. But survivor's guilt is a strange beast. Logic doesn't work against it. Around July, things started to change. We could hear it in the sounds outside. Different gunfire, organized gunfire, not the random shooting of drunk militias, but the controlled fire of an army. The RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the Tutsi rebel army led by Paul Kagame. They were advancing. The radio stations that had been broadcasting hate started to go quiet. We heard explosions, closer, then further, then closer again. The Interahamwe were fleeing. We could hear them running past, shouting about the RPF coming. Some were defiant, saying they'd fight. Others just ran. Bernard came up one night and told us, "The government is collapsing. The genocidaires are fleeing to Zaire. The RPF will be here soon." Soon turned out to be 2 weeks. 2 more weeks of uncertainty. 2 more weeks of hiding because we didn't know who controlled what, but the sounds of killing stopped. That was the first sign. The screaming stopped. The random gunfire stopped. Instead, we heard something we hadn't heard in 3 months. Normal sounds. People talking normally. Children playing. Life. It was almost too much to believe. On July 17, 1994, Bernard came to the ceiling and said the words I'd been dreaming of. "It's over. You can come down." I can't properly describe what it felt like to stand up straight for the first time in 3 months. Pain. Immediate, shooting pain through my legs and back. My muscles had atrophied. My joints were locked, but also relief. Such overwhelming relief. We climbed down from that ceiling, 3 skeleton-thin ghosts, and stood in Bernard and Immaculee's house, blinking in the light. Immaculée cried when she saw us. "You're so thin," she kept saying. "So thin." She made us food. Real food. But our stomachs couldn't handle much. We ate slowly, carefully. Then Bernard said the hard thing. "You need to understand. Outside, it's not what you remember." We went outside. The smell hit me first. Death has a smell. Sweet and rotten and wrong. It was everywhere. Bodies were still in the streets. Not as many as there had been. Apparently the RPF was working to clear them, but enough. More than enough. Houses were destroyed. Looted. Burned. And it was quiet. Eerily quiet. A city that had housed hundreds of thousands was nearly empty. The killers had fled. The killed were dead. The survivors were... where? We started searching, looking for anyone we knew, any family members who might have survived. I found my house, or what was left of it, burned, looted, empty. I found signs of what happened, blood stains, torn clothing, things I recognized as my mother's, my sister's, but no bodies. They weren't there. I searched for days, checked morgues, checked mass graves being excavated, checked refugee centers. Nothing. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened to them. I know they died at that roadblock or shortly after. But the details, where they're buried, I don't know. That not knowing is its own kind of torture. Jean had similar luck. No family found. All dead. Claude, though. Claude got a miracle. His mother had survived. She'd been hiding in a different house, in a different neighborhood. When we brought him to her, the reunion, I can't describe it. Joy and grief all mixed together, but she was the only one. His father, his siblings, his grandparents, all gone. That's how it was in Rwanda after the genocide. If you found one family member alive, you considered yourself lucky. Most found no one. The RPF set up camps for survivors. Medical care, food, counseling, though what counseling can do for that level of trauma, I don't know. I stayed with Bernard and Immaculée. They'd saved my life. They'd become my family. We started to learn the numbers, the scope. In 100 days, approximately 800,000 to 1 million people had been murdered. Mostly Tutsi, but also moderate Hutus who refused to participate. 100 days. That's about 10,000 people killed every day, about 400 people every hour, about 7 people every minute. The churches, schools, hospitals where people had sought refuge. Most became slaughter sites. The Interahamwe church alone had over 5,000 bodies. Roadblocks across the country had functioned as efficient killing stations. The Nyabarongo River had carried so many bodies that Lake Victoria, downstream, had to issue warnings about water contamination. Women and girls had been systematically raped, many intentionally infected with HIV as a slow death. Children had been killed. Babies. The elderly. No one was spared if they were Tutsi or protected Tutsis. And it was organized, coordinated. The government had planned this, had trained militias, had distributed weapons, had used radio to direct killers to where Tutsis were hiding. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic extermination. People ask me how you recover from something like that, how you rebuild. The truth, you don't. Not fully. You learn to live with it. You learn to function. But recovery? That suggests a return to what was before, and there is no going back. I had nightmares for years. Still do sometimes. I'd wake up screaming, covered in sweat, convinced I was back in that ceiling or running from that roadblock. I had survivor's guilt that was crushing. Why did I live when my family died? Why did I run when I should have stayed? I had anger. So much anger. At the killers, at the international community that abandoned us, at the UN that stood by, at France that had armed the genocidal government, at the world that knew what was happening and did nothing. But I also had to live, had to move forward, because the alternative was letting the genocide kill me too, just more slowly. Bernard and Immaculée helped. They became my foster family. Bernard went back to teaching, Immaculée went back to teaching. They believed in education, in rebuilding. I finished school. It took time. My education had been interrupted, but I finished. I went to university, studied engineering like I'd always planned. It seemed important to hold on to that dream, the one I'd had before. I met my wife there. She was also a survivor, also Tutsi, also carrying unbearable pain. We understood each other in ways that people who hadn't lived through it couldn't understand. We built a life, had children, 2 daughters. I named them after my sisters. It seemed important to keep their names alive. But healing is complicated. Rwanda as a country struggled with it. How do you reconcile when your neighbor tried to kill you? When your teacher murdered your parents? The government set up Gacaca courts. Community-based justice where perpetrators would confess and ask forgiveness, where survivors could learn what happened to their loved ones. Some survivors found this helpful, others found it traumatic. Being face-to-face with the people who killed your family, hearing the details. I went once, to see if anyone would confess about my family. No one did. Either they were dead themselves, or they fled to Congo and never came back. But I heard other confessions. A man who killed his neighbor with a machete, a teacher who gave up students hiding in her school, a doctor who poisoned Tutsi patients, ordinary people who made extraordinary choices to do evil. But I also heard about people like Bernard and Immaculée, Hutus who hid Tutsis, who risked everything, who chose humanity over hate. There's a garden in Kigali now, the Garden of Heroes. It honors those people, the rescuers, the brave ones. Bernard and Immaculée are on that wall, their names in stone. They saved 3 lives at the risk of their own. 3 lives. Me, Jeanne, and Claude. Jeanne became a doctor like she wanted. She works at a hospital in Kigali, treating survivors of violence and trauma. Claude became a teacher, like his mother, like Bernard. And me. I became an engineer. But I also became a witness. Someone who tells this story so people don't forget. So it doesn't happen again. Because here's the thing. The scariest thing about the Rwandan genocide isn't that it happened. It's how easily it could happen again, anywhere. All it takes is leaders who scapegoat a minority, media that dehumanizes people, ordinary citizens who choose to believe the lies, the rest of the world deciding not to intervene. Sound familiar? It should. We see these patterns emerging in different places, different groups being targeted, different justifications being used, but the mechanics are the same. Dehumanize, organize, execute. I'm telling you this story 30 years later. I'm in my late 40s now. My daughters are in university, and I still remember every detail of those 100 days. The smell, the sounds, the fear. I remember my father's face when he told me to run. I remember my mother's screams. I remember the feeling of hiding while the world ended. But I also remember Bernard and Immaculee's courage. I remember Jeanne's strength. I remember Claude's resilience. I remember that even in the darkest moments of human evil, there were sparks of human goodness. And I want you to understand several things. First, genocide doesn't start with killing. It starts with words, with propaganda, with dehumanization. When you hear people being called cockroaches or vermin or animals, that's not just rhetoric. That's the foundation being laid. Second, never again is a lie we tell ourselves. It happened again in Rwanda. It happened in Bosnia at the same time. It happened in Darfur later. It's happening in different forms right now in different places. The only way never again becomes true is if we actively fight against it. Every time we see the warning signs, every time we hear the dehumanizing language, every time we see minorities being scapegoated. Third, ordinary people commit genocide. Not monsters, not inhuman beasts. People like your neighbors, like your teachers, like your co-workers. Which means ordinary people can also prevent genocide by choosing not to participate, by hiding those who are targeted, by speaking up. Bernard and Immaculee were ordinary people. They had everything to lose. They saved us anyway. Fourth, the international community will not save you. The UN didn't save Rwanda. Despite knowing what was happening, despite having peacekeepers on the ground, they pulled out. It took the RPF, a rebel army, to stop the genocide. Not the international community, not peacekeepers, not humanitarian intervention. We have to save ourselves. We have to save each other. Fifth, trauma doesn't end when the violence ends. 30 years later, I still struggle. So do other survivors. The genocide killed hundreds of thousands directly, but it damaged millions indirectly. Mental health support for survivors is crucial. Understanding that healing is a lifetime process is crucial. And finally, we have to remember. We have to tell these stories. We have to keep the memory alive. Not to wallow in pain, not to perpetuate hatred, but to learn. To recognize the warning signs, to do better. There's a memorial in Kigali, the Kigali Genocide Memorial. It's built over mass graves. 250,000 people are buried there. I go every year on April 7th, the anniversary. I stand there and I read names. I remember faces. I think about my family, my neighbors, my friends. And I promise them that their deaths won't be meaningless, that I'll keep telling the story, that I'll keep fighting to make sure it doesn't happen again. Here's something hopeful, though. Rwanda has rebuilt in remarkable ways. We're not perfect. We have problems, political tensions, economic challenges, trauma that runs deep. But we've done things that seemed impossible in 1994. We've achieved reconciliation at levels that seemed unimaginable. Former perpetrators and survivors living in the same communities, sometimes even working together. We've built one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. We've invested in education, in healthcare, in technology. Kigali is clean, safe. People walk the streets at night without fear. We've banned ethnic identification on ID cards. We're all just Rwandans now. We've elected women to over 60% of our parliament, the highest percentage in the world. Many of these women are genocide survivors who decided to lead. We've created memorials, education programs, peace-building initiatives. We remember what happened, but we're not defined only by what happened. That's important. Yes, the genocide is part of our history. A crucial part, but it's not our only story. Rwanda is also about resilience, about choosing forgiveness over revenge, about building rather than destroying. It's about people like Bernard and Immaculée who chose courage over fear. It's about survivors like Jean and Claude and me who chose life over despair. It's about the next generation, my daughters and others, who are growing up knowing the history but not being limited by it. So why am I sharing this story with you today? Why open up these wounds publicly? Because I see the warning signs emerging in different parts of the world. I see refugees being called invaders. I see minority groups being scapegoated. I see dehumanizing language becoming normalized. I see social media spreading hate faster than radio ever could. I see echo chambers radicalizing people. I see othering happening at scale, and I recognize the pattern. Because I've lived it. So I'm speaking up. I'm telling you what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it leads to. I'm telling you that when people say, it can't happen here, they're wrong. It can happen anywhere. Rwanda was considered peaceful before 1994. I'm telling you that when people say, we'd never do that, they might be wrong. Ordinary people did it in Rwanda. Ordinary people could do it anywhere if the conditions are right. I'm telling you to pay attention, to speak up when you hear dehumanizing language, to push back against propaganda, to protect minorities being targeted. I'm telling you to be like Bernard and Immaculée, to choose courage, to help those in danger even at risk to yourself, because that's what it takes. Individual people making individual choices to do the right thing. I survived because 2 people made that choice. 2 people decided that saving lives mattered more than their own safety. Who will you save? When the moment comes, will you choose courage? I'm an old man now by the standards of my life expectancy. Trauma ages you, stress ages you, but I'm still here. I survived 100 days of hell. I survived the aftermath. I survived the nightmares and the guilt and the anger, and I've built a life that matters, a family that thrives. A career that contributes. I've chosen to let survival mean something, to honor my family's memory by living fully, by speaking truth, by working for a better world. My daughters know the story. They know what happened to the family they never met. They know about the grandfather who died telling me to run, about the aunts who never got to grow up, but they also know about Bernard and Immaculée, about the good that exists even in darkness. They're growing up in a Rwanda that's different from the one I grew up in. Safer, more unified, more hopeful. But they also know it's fragile. That peace requires constant work. That hatred can return if we're not vigilant. So they're vigilant. As am I, as we all must be. Because never again isn't a promise. It's a commitment. One we have to renew every day, one we renew by remembering, by telling stories, by recognizing warning signs, by standing up against hate, by choosing every single day to be human, to see the humanity in others, to protect the vulnerable. That's what I learned hiding in that ceiling. That's what I learned from Bernard and Immaculée. That's what I learned from surviving. Humanity is a choice, and we have to keep choosing it. So here's my call to action for you. Learn about genocide. Not just Rwanda, but all of them. The Holocaust, Cambodia, Bosnia, Darfur, the Rohingya, the Uyghurs. Learn the patterns, learn the warning signs, learn how it starts. Then pay attention to the world around you. Notice when minorities are being scapegoated. Notice when dehumanizing language is being used. Notice when hate is being normalized. And speak up. Push back. Don't let it go unchallenged. Support survivors of genocide and mass atrocity. Support refugees. Support organizations working to prevent future genocides. Visit memorials if you can. The Kigali Genocide Memorial, the Holocaust Museums, the genocide memorials around the world. Bear witness to what happened. Let it affect you, let it change you, and then act. Make different choices. Be the person who would hide someone. Be the person who would speak up. Be the person who would intervene. Because genocide is prevented by ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Be that person, and please, share this story, not because I want attention, but because these stories need to be told. They need to be heard. They need to be remembered. Every view, every share, every conversation started by this story is a tiny act of resistance against forgetting. And forgetting is how it happens again. So remember, learn, act. That's how we honor the dead. That's how we protect the living. That's how we actually make never again mean something. Thank you for listening to my story, for bearing witness, for carrying this knowledge forward. Now go, live your life, but live it with eyes open. Live it with awareness. Live it with courage. And if your moment comes, if you're ever in a position to save someone, to stand up against hate, to choose humanity over fear, choose well. Because someone's life might depend on it. Someone like me, someone like Jean, someone like Claude, someone who just wants to survive, to live, to have a future. Be their Bernard, be their Immaculée, be the light in the darkness. That's all, that's my story, that's my message. Remember Rwanda, remember the genocide, remember the warning signs, and never, ever forget that it could happen again, unless we choose differently. So choose differently. If this story affected you, if it made you think, if it made you want to learn more or do more, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with others who need to hear it, and leave a comment. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me what you learned. Tell me how you'll choose differently. Let's keep this conversation going, because that's how we build a world where genocide becomes truly impossible. Not by forgetting, but by remembering and acting. Thank you, Murakoze. Thank you in Kinyarwanda, and never forget.